I think it's going to be repetitive in the sense that a lot of issues have been brought out by the keynote panel. This is very interesting. And some of the critical element of supply chain, which has been our legacy, could also be a deterrent and constraints to any transformation. And this is where I think moving from more deterministic to resilient planning and more deterministic forecasting to a resilient forecasting is going to be a very tough task for organizations. And I hope that as we have moved all along these years of internet-based technologies, your ERPs, your softwares, I think it is very important for us to realize that with so much of advancement in technology in the last 1.5 decades, I think our supply chain suffers from the same problem of variability. The famous bullwhip effect, where your demand is 300 and your variation is, or standard deviation is 227. So obviously everybody holds this. And this kind of inventory in the system, where there is a stock out, there is also a surplus somewhere. And we are not able to tackle this problem. So planning becomes a very essential part of managing this implied variability. And if planning becomes a very important part of managing implied variability, which essentially is the variability generated by your business, variability generated by your disconnect in businesses and your supply chain. That's the first fundamental issue that needs to be tackled for any transformation in any supply chain. And if I see, this is one thing which really is very important. A lot of us post-COVID talked about a quick response model. Everything has changed. Planning, I think Dr. Sinha apologizes, but many other people said planning is dead, and we need to have softwares which are very quick response, and hence replenishment models can replace planning in a big way. And what we could do is that we could just know what's lying where and we can respond. I think the same old rhetoric of demand planning started being propagated in a big way. Software companies some of them were very quick to capitalize on it. Does one size fits all supply chain? And it does not. And if it does not, it's not about two businesses. I'm talking about even within a business. Even within a business, one size may not fit all. And anyone wanting to have a very responsive supply chain or more resilient in terms of quick response, I think a lot of companies are thinking and moving towards that direction. But for me, can you use quick response in a system if your demand is mostly stable? A company which came to us and wanted us to just tell them what kind of software they need to do. It's a very well-known company in the northern India, is doing extremely well in washing powders and detergents. I won't name it. I think you can guess it, but I won't name it. Has a coefficient of variation of 0.3 and wanted a model or a software which could really be quick response. Amazing. This kind of thinking of quick response needs to stop. If your coefficient of variation, your standard deviation is much lower, or your error is much lower in terms of what sales are you really capturing over the period. I have seen another trend in few companies. This is the larger agrochemical companies. The annual sales have been very, very regular. If you look at the sales period, take a trend, it is simply a good trend. You take their orders, you take their inventories, and it becomes a very complicated trend. Amazing. They need a quick response. And I think this is something that really needs to be looked at. If your distribution model is simple, I think if you just have a small businesses, looking at certain geographies, you divide your whole country into 11 geographies and you serve, and you have a very simple this thing. Why do you need quick response when your product is stable? Now that's another one. But you need quick response for a complex distribution system, but you will not need a quick response for a complex distribution system. It is blind. If it is blind, and it really spikes the demand at each levels of your distribution. And most, as I said earlier, most distribution networks still remains to be quite blind. Partially blind or quite blind, and this is where a huge amount of bullwhip effect that come in. If your supplier are inflexible and have long lead time, don't allow changes. Mayur, here is the answer to your question. Simple and very one-liner answer to your question that why airlines suffer because of this and they don't plan. That's it. In fact, any organization which does not understand its structure of supply chains and go on to wait for spare parts to be actually over and then plan with a long lead of 4 months or 8 months or 9 months or 2 years, in this case, you're dead. Here is a market where you need more lumpy demands. There are periods of zero demands, and you are trying to say that I can just get it on the quick response. Quick response do not work in period where your supply chains are broken. Quick response does not break when your supply chains are dynamic. Why? You use wrong ways of understanding them. Your supply chain is definitely one of the laggard supply chain. It's not even efficient supply chain. Leave apart any other supply chain, the first stage of supply chain that we talk about. If that's not so true, this is it. If your product innovation cycle is predictable, many people say that we have new products behave very differently. 80% of new products are cannibalized products. And you have a history for those cannibalized products and you say, oh, I can't predict it because it is new. Here it is. You can predict it. You have a history. It becomes as simple as stable. And if it becomes stable, you can do it. You can at least have the baseline forecast. And if you can have the baseline forecast, this is something. If you plan just once per month, I think I heard it and I think it's very interesting. Everyone plans still for 1 month, right? Here is the story. If you plan for 1 month, what are you doing? You are removing all the uncertainty and creating nervousness and firefighting in your supply chains. Your buckets, the whole concept of buckets are clear indication of why you create your last part of the bucket very heavy, despite moving towards more advanced systems, despite moving towards more agile forecasting system, despite moving towards analytics. Now this is the reality of supply chains in the whole thing. Fundamentally, I have taken a supply chain argument, where it's supply-centric argument. So people say, I picked it up from somewhere to make it more dynamic and contemporary. Kim Kardashian. The whole market has to change with the speed at which her lipstick changes, right? Can these supply chains actually respond to those? And here is the simple answer. Demand that changes the speed of thought. I think her lipstick changes the speed of thought, and I think nobody responds that greatly to her. Here it is. How can you actually respond with an unresponsive supply chain? Then you say, oh, we do just planning and we don't do execution. Who stops from you creating this redesign? So you need to create a redesign where you look at planning as a part of execution. That's it. What have we been doing? We have been looking at planning as planning, execution as execution. Even the large number of software vendors who are into the leadership quadrant of Gartner are looking at execution as an exception to planning. Now this is fundamentally a flaw that exists in our thinking. And hence, is software sales still a push to the organizations amidst all that we say about disruptions and resilience? Now, that's a big question, and I think this is where selecting a software requires an amazing amount of understanding rather than just the fancy of it. Gartner is very interesting. If anyone can read Gartner's report on these quadrants, I'll be glad to take a debate here in the next DPFF. They have blinded the way they actually rate softwares. They say we use weights, but they never allow the general information on these weights to be available. You have to pay a huge amount of money to understand how they weight the software. So I think this is something on the change that's happening. You cannot bring about these changes, and you cannot really look at it. And hence, everybody talks about IBP. What have we been moving towards? Reactionary firefighting activity focused on preventing shortages to an end-to-end process that maximizes value across the enterprise and network through conscious organizational trade-off. This journey from the stage of supply chain planning maturity, I think we all have got caught up somewhere between these two. Rudimentary firefighting processes and trying to get a single plan, the single source of truth. I think this word has become very interesting, single source of truth. What is a single source of truth? The single source of truth has to be decomposed into multiple sources of truth to bring a single source of acting on it. There are so many multiple sources of truth that really needs to be taken care of, and hence, where are we? Despite the challenge, despite everything, we are here. Yes, there are transitions, there are companies that are doing well. You will see some of the companies that present in best practices have actually moved into those domains of unknowns into creating supply chains. But transition to supply chain is there. I think I want to say this, we have seen large number of companies talking about S&OP maturity levels, IBP, and digital transformation. So I think that's there. But at the core of it, what needs to be done as a starting point is to see that the supply chain become efficient is missing in the whole process. Should we use forecasting? What is forecasting in demand planning and supply chain planning? I think Rohit answered it very well. Really is the baseline, nothing more than that. If forecasting is the baseline, then how do we forecast? The whole title of this talk saying that moving from deterministic to resilient. What is resilience forecasting? I think we talk too much about resilient forecasting. What is resilience forecasting? Do we really have an use of resilient forecasting in our forecasting processes? Is deterministic planning totally dead? Is deterministic planning same as the whole data sciences? Or it's a way of looking at things. And I think there is a Fisher's article in Harvard Business School, 1997. Amazing article, gives a very strong perspective of how a supply chain is a multi-supply chain within an organization, depending upon what kind of product and what kind of granularity in product that you can really look at and move ahead. It says all functional product has stable demand. Dr. Sinha Godrej has all functional product, and all functional products are stable in a big way, and that can be predicted with the historical pattern and disaggregated. And I think this has worked very well for FMCGs in India with a lot of variability because of the design of the supply chain, not forecasting. Every time you can't blame forecasting, but you can predict almost all those which are functional, which have a stable demand, and hence the data works well. The same Excel can work well. During the pandemic, a survey by Laura Serreris, he's an analyst, in Europe shows that all those who did not have an amazing IBP or S&OP, whatever tool they had moved into Excel because it was not useful. And if it was not useful, why have them? The fundamental thing is that if you don't have a great architecture to work on it, and don't identify within architecture the patterns which can be predicted without really worrying about bringing all those different models, but simply on a time series model, work on those products in this way, make them efficient, reduce inventory, and go ahead. But how do you look at the dynamic products? Deterministic product can be 40% of your portfolio. New product, another 40%. How do you look at them? How do you predict a dynamic product? And that's very important. And here it is. I picked it from another software vendor, but he happens to be a thought leader. He says that the world is changing in terms of globalization and proliferation, as Dr. Sinha says. Finer granularity and intermittency in demand patterns are emerging in the FMCGs, largest FMCGs, and also in the spare parts. Look at automotive. The kind of demand that you see is in spare parts is granular as well as intermittent as well as zero period demand. He says, Amazon effect, product needs to be available locally today, high service level per location, finer time granularity and intermittency. I mean, demand is not stable. What is Amazon? Amazon is a project company or an event company. It creates event. Almost all retail are events company. They campaign. And the campaigns have to be understood in a finer way. That means there is no continuous demand for your product. It is intermittency. How do you incorporate them into the whole process? Or market volatility, higher frequency of forecast plan per update as the volatility in the market increases because of uncertainty. How do you really look at them? And why is the rise of the long tails happening? These are called as long tails. No more is your SKU remaining in a very well-defined system. ABC analysis, look at the data for almost all the consumer durable goods or FMCGs. They are all playing with more and more SKUs, reacting to competition in a big way. Gone are the whole concept of ABC in this sense of the term. And when you look at, there is a huge product proliferation in an SKU level across the globe in almost every industry, except the simpler and the efficient one, which I said can be predicted easily. If you look at replenishment, there is a more frequent replenishment, faster delivery, and reaction to demand changes, which require shorter replenishment period. There are a lot of people who are talking about instant delivery. Look at FMCGs, the delivery system has gone from everywhere you are talking about day 2 and day 3. And day 1 and maybe weekly, and with all these Zeptos and Blinkits, it's almost 10 minutes or to 20 minutes. I think that's changing the whole system of demand in a big way. If you look at extended supply chain, increased collaboration between vendors, distributors, and retailers provide downstream demand visibility closer to the end customer. I think this is the reality. So this is not a constraint. This is not a super stockist cannot be the best model to deliver to India. Super stockist models are dying in India. And why? If you see dying meaning they're not over. There is a complete redesign that's happening at their cost. They are shrinking. That's what I mean. And over the next 10 years, this particular shrinkage will happen in a way that you will see a huge distribution networks that emerge in this country. How do you look at these long tails? We forecast the average here. And we say, let's plan. We don't know what lies in the long tail, both the sides. We think average is a good representation of this thing. Any forecasting method with averages when the demand is not stable is faulty. I need to know these extremes as they change over here. Am I able to do this?
am I able to look at forecasting of dynamic products in a better way? And this is where, if you really look at the difference between the new way, and I would say that it fits distribution, any data including intermittent. It can fit distribution at granular level. It can fit the whole intermittency and zero demand period into the system. It can give you a forecast with a probability of its occurrence based on past, as well as demand signal probabilities that you have. Do you try probabilistic model through machine learnings? When machine learnings can model in any way, why not try this? Why not look at businesses and forecasting in a way that you get the probabilistic forecast which understands the distribution, and it does not really depend upon a single number forecasting, a single number forecasting, but takes everything into account. All automobiles, spare parts, they don't need that. We use that forecast. Use this. They give you the whole patterns of distribution in a way that is important. They give you the extremes, and extremes are resilience. Build resilient planning and forecasting into a model. And this is where the gap is, and this is where we really don't understand that we don't need to fit curves. We don't need to have something which is very important, very singular. We need to have a distribution including anything, and we need to see that it's not top down, a granular forecast broken up into this. You're saying, I know the granularity, and I know the, what is it called, aggregate forecast, and granularity emerges out of aggregate. That is over. What is important is to get a granular data which is not precise, but is accurate and ranges with distribution that are right and gives the probability of the distribution of its occurrence. Maybe we are much better off. With the rise of MLAI, I think this is one area where we have moved very critically in terms of demand planning and bionic demand planning, where machine learning and people work together. This is what I would say. One of the things that we really need to realize is that we talk about machine learning, differentiated planning, root cause analysis, analytic plannings facilitated by AE, ML, and analytics. And you don't use them that critically, or not intelligently also. ML AI is an enabler. Altman's statement 2 days back, in an interview which was published in Economic Times, clearly says that we overhype the role of chat GPTs. What do? They aggregate whatever is available. So how are they better than deterministic models? They are same. They are using historical data, arranging them into a structured form from an unstructured data, and they give you patterns out of that data. How are they different? And hence, for them to be different, we need to move a little more effectively and see. If we have forecasting, we have probabilities in forecasting, that's not enough. We need to have demand sensing. And if you have to have demand sensing, we really need to look at data sources for better demand sourcing. And when we look at this, look at this, e-commerce sales data, sales transaction, purchase order, inventory, your own POS information from even the Santis or the super stockist, your loyalty card, customer service, whether customer store, ship, receipt, third party, all these are structured data. You can have unstructured data in terms of websites, in-store devices, click streams, everything. Why can't we really use this data for this thing, all the analysis that we do? And when we do this, and when we know these internal data which is available, why can't we use machine learning to create analytics? Analytics where each data becomes a product for solving supply chain problems. And this data really is a better way to put to data to work rather than create inventories of data. Don't know why you need data. Have your data for a particular problem. If ML can really be a great machine to churn out huge amount of outputs from amazing amount of input, why don't we use them for the problem specific solution that data really have? We create huge amount of insights and we get confused. Let me give you a simple example. If I have to really look at what creates complete implied variability in the organizations, I've just aggregated few factors. Promotions, advertisement, local competition, shop attractiveness, shop assortment and layout, available product at the point of sale and expiring products. How would I use an outcome from a ML AI framework in terms of analytics? How do I make the decision making? How do I create a right data for the product? And if I look at shop assortment and layout, what would I do? I use all the three kinds of analytics. One, descriptive. What will I do with descriptive? Categorize products depending on their location in the shop. Discover how much time customers spent in the shop. I get the intelligence, I get the insight. What do? I try to predict, change model according to shop assortments, determine influence of product location on the demand. And what do I finally do? What do I prescribe as a strategy? Optimize shop layout. I can get data not only for planning but for execution. I don't get a single source of truth. I can create a single source of truth as an extended source of truth for the overall supply chain. And that's what matters. That's what matters in terms of creating an extensive value chain analysis for the organizations where the same set of data gives me almost all the answers to the problems of supply chains, to the problems of demand planning, and this is something that we really need to look at it. All right, I'll just skip. External factors. I can do a demand sensing on quality, competition, prices, fashion and trends, buying behavior, brand awareness, everything. And everything can be used. But when I look at the whole external factor, outside in factor, whether we take weather into account, special events into account, seasonality into account, income level, economic outlooks, can we really look at India? We did debate in the keynote panel. I can say the India of tomorrow will be in next 3 years. Let's look at this. Look at the world data. 2.7, world is shrinking to 1.3. Europe, 2.7, shrinking to 0.5. China, 5.5, 3.8. Asia, 4.5, 4.5. Africa, 4.5, 5.5. India, 6.7, 6.3, 6.9, 7.2. You look at investment data into India. What is investment? Investing into infrastructure and capital. 1.5, world 0.5, China 0.6. Next 5 years, this is IMF data. Next 5 years, India 3.9, the world average 0.7, China 1.5. That means here is a country which has a different scenario. How do I really look at this? And not only this, look at the way the Indian demographic is changing in terms of urbanization. We have 400 3-tier cities. We have 5,000 4-tier cities. What are these 5,000 blocks? What are they becoming? They are becoming hub for retail. Anyone would be in retail businesses. Look at Reliance Next Commerce or New Commerce. I think it's between Next or New. They have just looked at blocks in a big way, and they are really moving in a way that India needs to move. How do they aggregate the old players? They become your distribution pickup points or storage point or distribution points. You have to change. Like in India, there was a model. Haats and melas were the source of distribution. Haats were bazaars where 10 villages were around this. Melas was one point this thing where thousands of villages came to that. What was that? It was Amazon. What does Amazon? Hub and spoke model. In Arkansas, they did this and they distorted everybody. Here is something that is happening in India in terms of income levels and local development. These factors gives you a long-term scenario planning. Are we really building those scenarios? And I think that makes a sense. So world of tomorrow is very uncertain. Tools of today can help you understand uncertainty to a great extent, very great extent, because if you know to build scenarios, you need to know these scenarios are predictive, and you know the predictive R-square value, and in an appropriate way, you can actually say what would be the influence of this on your demand, and you can factor in as a demand signal in an intuitive way. No macroeconomic factors can give you precise answers to your forecasting number. They only give you the patterns and shares, and you need to define that. So this is something that really moves ahead. Unseasonal rains dampen summer product sales. This is 2 months back. Air conditioners, Coke, they all have been affected, and I think the struggle in Coke is also very interesting in different markets with different. Do you know today, I was just listening to my radio in the car and I said, wow, El Nino is here in July. How many of us even look at this simple news and use them as a critical input for planning? And this is very critical. So I think there are a few questions that I pose. How do we tackle a larger disruption? Taiwan-China war. I'm not talking about Ukraine. What if we have Taiwan-China war? Do we have the scenarios for that? It is very important to look at, even if we don't have war, there are going to be smaller wars within these two countries. And it's very looming large on us that there would be trade sanctions, there will be blockage of roads, and not blockage of roads like the Suez Canal. It is geopolitically blockage of roads. Are we planning for them? Are we really looking at those short runs? And these plannings are important. And hence, alternate futures, a range of futures, ambiguity. There are so many things that are going to be ambiguous for them, as Dr. Sinha rightly said, build your capabilities. Everybody says that we have a business continuity plan, Dr. Sinha. None of the companies go beyond tier 1 suppliers. Maximum tier 2 suppliers. An auto company has average 18,000 to 50,000 tier N suppliers. How do you look at this? In your tier 24, if there is a disruptions and that contributes just 2% of your total sourcing, you are disrupted for 3 weeks. Visibility is an important, and this is where I say that when you build visibility, please build these things first. A complete capabilities in terms of organizational culture, training and development, low-code, no-code tools, and agile teams. This is a fundamental change that you really need to have, and this organizational architecture defines everything. This is why the next panel, we thought IBP would make a big change into thinking of planning. You look at our, technology, machine learning, deep learning, develop ops pipelines, data and real-time analytics. Build them, use them. And the third, build a data platform, horizontal integration and normalization data, create data governance. Make it as a part of your IBP. We don't get that into a part of the IBP. And that's where, this is what happens. If you see the traditional approaches to using data, then companies have data pipelines designed for batch and real-time delivery or fragmented and distributed. They're just replicating their supply chain, broken supply chain. If you see data for each domain, such as the customer, is inefficiently reworked for every use case, and quality definitions and formats vary. Different technologies are employed for each use cases, adding expense and complexity. This is a Harvard Business School review study of top 500 Fortune 500 companies, not the bottom ones. And hence, even those leaders in the race of getting their organization, supply chain, data and planning in place have a broken data structure. And this is where broken supply chain with broken data can definitely be a very problematic issues. Have your tech intensity build up into tech maturity with a tech governance to create and elevate your SNOP and IBP to an integrated value chain processes where your logistics, data, business intelligence, information chain are seamlessly connected, and you can see each and every schedules and part, whether it is 18,000 supplier or the villages in rural India. I think that's what we are talking about, end-to-end supply chain. And that should be the benchmark for us to really make planning an effective mechanism. The transition has to be on to this, and I thought I'll just be a little critical of it. In COVID, this is what we did. In COVID, we looked at buying things, buy plants, reallocate staff towards high demand categories. We reallocated city storage and the urban storage and the rural storage based on high demand this thing. We reallocated logistics to the high demand product, and we created fulfillment parks and city logistics for the high demand park. That's it. That means there has to be one number that defines your everything. Understanding that number requires an amazing thought process. And if you don't have this, where is the question of execution? You can't marry your execution to anything that is called as your real demand or your real business. Have your real data is what really makes it. This is a McKinsey writer in 2020, which I use. I thought today I could use and say, it was the first time that we thought that integrated business planning works very well in a war room like where everybody aggregated together to say, what do we do with this high demand? What do you do with this zones, containment zones, block zones, whatever words we use at that point of time? Here it is. Common sense broken up into a lot of insights, supported by technology and a great people's organization. That's what is the world of supply chain planning is looking for. Thank you.